Viktor Frankl, a distinguished psychiatrist and survivor of unspeakable atrocities at the hands of the Nazis in one of their concentration camps, says the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. In fact, it was learning this that kept him free and alive even while he was languishing in a death camp. Let me give you that one again. It's so important. The last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Attitude, being an inner thing, can keep us free, even fairly cheerful, regardless of the environment in which circumstances may have placed us. The ancient philosophers had discovered this fact, but it seems that each maturing person must rediscover it for himself if he's to find his own brand of freedom. Now, Dr. Frankl also wrote, "Fear makes come true that which one is afraid of." Now, even if it only comes true in the imagination, we must experience the tortures of that which we fear. Tortures often as not worse than those if what we feared actually came to pass physically in our lives. It's why the old line, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man dies but once," is really true. Fear makes come true that which one is afraid of. If fear of something is held long enough, it may well bring on that which we fear, but it really doesn't make much difference because experiencing the fear is the same thing. That is, as far as our mind and body are concerned, it's actually happening over and over again, doing its inevitable damage to our physical bodies. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Fear is ignorance." Whenever we're afraid of something, I don't mean the perfectly natural, normal fears that work to keep us alive, but the gnawing, unreasoning, illogical, and neurotic fear of something. It's only because we don't know the real truth about it. If we did, the fear would vanish. That would include a neurotic fear of death, the fear that we are not liked or loved, and so forth. I think the thing to remember here is that when we fear something, it takes its toll on our mind and body just as if that which we fear had in fact come to pass. And we can bring to pass that which we fear, as Dr. Frankl said. But how does a person change an attitude of fear? Well, Dr. William Glasser, whom I'm very honored to number among my good friends, Dr. William Glasser, the distinguished psychiatrist and author of Reality Therapy and Schools Without Failure, says, if you want to change attitudes, start with a change in behavior. In other words, begin to act the part as well as you can of the person you would rather be, the person you most want to become. Gradually, the old fearful person will fade away. Dr. Frankl learned that by controlling his attitude, the concentration camp fell away. His mind was free to roam where he wanted it to roam, think about what he wanted it to think about. It was as free as the birds, freer, really, for it could fly to the ends of the earth, to the ends of imagination in an instant. And so can yours. And so can mine. What gift would be more worthy of you than the fulfillment of an idle daydream? What one thing would help you win through the problems you face today and may face again tomorrow? What gift would enable you to enjoy because you've fought, to rest because you've labored, to reap because you've sown? There is such a gift within your grasp, a gift which you yourself can give yourself, a gift which will bring all the things for which you secretly long, a gift which, like magic, will help clear the troubled roadway ahead and set your feet upon the pathway to real happiness. And that is the gift of courage. Emerson wrote, "What a new face courage puts on everything." And no truer statement was ever written. Wherever it appears, courage changes things for the better. Sometimes it's the courage to be silent when a word or phrase leaps to our mind. It's often the courage to get up on a cold, miserable morning when it's the last thing in the world you want to do, to go to work. It's the courage to do what needs to be done when it should be done. It's the courage to discharge a person who should be discharged and who will probably be better off because of it. And it's the courage to follow the silent voice within you when it means going against the crowd, or speaking out when you know what you're going to say will be unpopular with your listeners. It's the courage to stay with something long enough to succeed at it, realizing that it usually takes 2, 3, or 4 times as long to succeed as you first thought or hoped. Laughter is the severest form of criticism, and the fear of criticism keeps us from doing a lot of things. It keeps us from doing a lot of things we should not, but it also keeps us from doing a lot of things that we would be better off doing. It is one of the enormous pressures of environment. Take the worker, for example, who avoids doing an outstanding and conscientious job because of the fear that his more cynical associates might laugh at him. Now here, the fear of criticism in the form of laughter could shape a man's life and keep him from the goals and achievements he might otherwise reach, if he weren't so conscious of how his actions will look to others. It is here that a better understanding of what is right and wrong can overcome a person's fear of criticism. Frequently, being right and doing what is right can bring down upon us criticism and derision while going along with things, even though we know they're wrong, will keep us in good with the crowd and our associates. Now, it's right here that the men are separated from the boys. When our desire to belong to our crowd is more important to us than to stand up for what we know to be right, we have to admit that we are lacking in the two most important attributes of a human being, courage and maturity. Winston Churchill once said that courage is the finest quality because it guarantees all the others. And if there's one vital aspect of living successfully that we should get across to our youngsters, it's this. If our kids want to dress like all the other kids in their class, fine, that's normal. We were the same way when we were kids. But they should be told why they want to look like all the other kids in school. That it's their natural desire to belong, to be liked. And while that's perfectly all right, they should keep constantly in mind that it should end there. And that it's also right that we should want to grow into individuals with individual goals, individual thinking, individual action. And that we'll be happiest if we will do our work as best we possibly can, even though it may be the fashion for most of the rest to slide along as easily as possible. F.D. Huntington wrote, "Conduct is the great profession. Behavior is the perpetual revealing of us. What a man does tells us what he is."
But how many things are there at which we succeed, at which we could be successful on a much larger scale? It's all a mental game. We play the whole thing out in our minds, and it's there, not in actual practice, that we win or lose. No one can even guess how much is lost by the so-called average person simply because he fears to make the attempt. His fear of failure in his own eyes and in the eyes of his family and friends, and the possible loss of a small stake, raises a formidable wall between his reality and his dream. So he contents himself to peek at his dream over the top of the wall and wait. Wait until conditions are better, or Uncle Charlie dies and leaves all that money. But waiting just seems to make the wall grow higher. Conditions seem to remain about the same, and Uncle Charlie's going to outlive everybody in the family. Colton wrote, "Times of general calamity and confusion have ever been productive of the greatest minds. The purest ore is produced from the hottest furnace, and the brightest thunderbolt is elicited from the darkest storms." Here's a line worth remembering. It was written by Balzac. "By resorting to self-resignation, the unfortunate consummate their misfortune." There's a world of truth and a world of unnecessary suffering in that statement. The only thing that can keep misfortune hanging around is self-resignation, giving up. Makes you wonder how many thousands, perhaps millions, of fine people stay on the bottom of the pile because they've formed the habit of saying, "Well, that's the way things are," or "That's the way the old ball bounces." Now, that would be all right for cows and pigs. They have to take life as it comes, but it's the very thing a person does not have to do. If things are going badly for him, he can change things and cause them to become good. If he isn't making enough money, he can find ways of earning more. If he doesn't like his neighborhood, he can move. If he doesn't like his job, he can quit. If he doesn't like being ignorant, he can get an education. He can, as a matter of fact, do anything he wants to do. But as a rule, he doesn't know this. So he shrugs his shoulders, gets a sad look on his face, stands still, does nothing, and says, "Well, that's the way it is." If everybody had said that from the very beginning, we'd still be running around without any clothes on, throwing rocks at each other. Let's go back to Balzac's little epigram. He said, "By resorting to self-resignation, the unfortunate consummate their misfortune." In other words, by wallowing in self-resignation, the unfortunate cause a bad situation to get worse and stay there. Every human being on Earth is going to suffer a setback from time to time. Setbacks are a part of life, as are fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes. But fortunately, the human being is a builder and a rebuilder, and he rebuilds better than he builds. He doesn't sit in the aftermath of the storm and resign himself. He builds better next time, so the damage won't be as great or even hurt him at all. That's how skyscrapers evolved from mud huts. Outside of death and taxes, we don't have to resign ourselves to anything. And if the situation is bad, unfortunate or unpleasant, self-resignation, as Balzac pointed out, will only consummate the fact. To my mind, there are few people more to be pitied than the sighers, resigners, and shoulder-shruggers, those who would rather complain than think, who would rather bleat than take action, who would rather ask for help than help themselves. If you know people like that, it's a good idea to keep away from them unless you're very strong. They'll infect you with their virus, splash you with their mud, and they're almost impossible to help. Like rag dolls, they'll flop right back down again the minute you turn loose of them. Just make sure you don't adopt any of their fatal habits. When things start to look bleak, remember that you have the power to change them, and that you're the only creature on Earth with that kind of power. Build better and stronger next time. Do something about it. Change a bad situation into a good one. Don't ask how. Figure it out for yourself.
A man in earnest finds means, or if he cannot find them, creates them. A vigorous purpose makes much out of little, breathes power into weak instruments, disarms difficulties, and even turns them into assistances. Every condition has means of progress, if we have spirit enough to use them. The truth that progress is the very end of our being must not be received as a tradition, but comprehended and felt as a reality. A man is to cultivate himself because he is a man. He's to start with the conviction that there's something greater within him than in the whole material creation, than in all the worlds which press on the eye and ear, and that inward improvements have a worth and dignity in themselves, quite distinct from the power they give our outward things. Undoubtedly, a man is to labor to better his conditions, but first, to better himself. Difficulties are meant to rouse, not discourage. The human spirit is to grow strong by conflict, and how much it has already overcome. What mountains of difficulty has it cleared? And with all this experience, shall we say that the progress of men is to be despaired of? You cannot, without guilt and disgrace, stop where you are. The past and the present call you on to advance. Let what you have gained be an impulse to something higher. Your nature is too great to be crushed. If you will, you can rise. No power in society, no hardship in your condition can depress you, keep you down in knowledge, power, virtue, influence, but by your own consent. The words of William Channing. But by your own consent, there's the key. You are today what you have consented to be. You'll be tomorrow and the day after and next year and 10 years from now what you will consent to be. The decision is yours for you and mine for me, and his and hers for every human being on the face of the earth. Understanding this brings reality into the way we look at the world and the people in it. Boris Pasternak was free in a nation enslaved by communism. And in our own free world, there are millions of slaves who do not know that personal freedom is an inner thing. Our Constitution guarantees our freedom, but it cannot be enforced. That's left to us, to you and me. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And he was in a position to know. He was a Roman slave. The person who has mastered himself has mastered his world and can mold it into any shape he will.